Okay, so right now I'm going to introduce Ms. Linda Umbach, who will introduce the patient panel.
Because Christy, Jill of all trades, is on the panel. So, Christy, would you please take your place at the panel? Christy is a former dialysis patient. She's now had a transplant. She also works for Satellite. Yay! And she works with the dialysis patients on helping them figure out their finances. So save your questions about that for Christy. Greg Muster is a member of our group and was on dialysis until he got that call 2 weeks after he signed up at UC Davis. He got a transplant. Wow. So he's going to talk to us about peritoneal dialysis. Horace Greeley, who has been on nocturnal, and you'll now get to hear about nocturnal dialysis, will also join the panel. And Phil, our jack of all trades here, who was on dialysis, and he did in-center dialysis, right, Phil?
Yes.
I'm not that one next one, okay. And then, who have I forgotten? Wayne, there you are. And Wayne Benyon, who is now on home hemodialysis. Now they're all going to tell you a little bit about their history and a little bit about dialysis and what they're doing now. I'm going to give you the microphones. So, do we want to start with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Greg. The source of my kidney disease was high blood pressure, and there was some hereditary stuff going on there too. My mother had kidney failure due to high blood pressure as well, so I just kind of got the same thing. And I was on dialysis for about a year and a half. I went on to PD. I was kind of fortunate. I've heard some stories of other people's journey where when their kidneys began to fail, their doctors moved them into one mode of dialysis or another with very little discussion. I was lucky enough to be with Kaiser, and they sent us, when my nephrologist decided that it was about time for me to start thinking about dialysis, he sent me over to Wellbound, which is a satellite organization, and they had a training session there, and a doctor came in, and he literally went over all of the different types of dialysis that were available with the pros and cons of each, as kind of a food for thought about what it is that you were going to be embarking on. And through that session, I determined that PD was something that interested me. I was still working. I wanted to continue working, and I didn't want to. I wanted to live my life as normal as possible with this disease. I saw what my mother had gone through. She was on hemodialysis. She was one of the people that we just saw up here on the slides that took long for recovery after each session. And I remember that literally it would take almost a day for her to come back around again after each dialysis session, and I thought to myself that I didn't want to go through that. So I chose PD. I'm very glad that I did. My kidney still had some functionality when I got onto PD, so it was just a very gentle, easy transition. I mean, it wasn't, getting the catheter installed and all that stuff. And there was about a 5-week training period to do it. But, it was so easy just to go to bed at night, hook myself up to the cycler, wake up in the morning, unhook myself, and go to work and live a normal life. After a short while, I started traveling, took the cycler with me, and arranged for dialysis fluids to be shipped to whatever location that we were going to. So I felt like I was in total control of even of my lifestyle, even while doing this process. So I would encourage people to really, like you said, go onto that website. That's a great thing that she just showed us about choosing the type of lifestyle that you want to have, and then having that be your, part of your decision in what kind of dialysis to undertake. But I think that's all I've got.
Could you give us a little bit about the procedure?
The actual
Yeah, what do you go through?
mechanics of it.
Just a little bit.
Well, there is, there is one thing about PD is that you have to be very disciplined. Because you need to think about, again, my job at work, I had to be there at 7:30. My PD took 8.5 hours with about a 20-minute at the beginning, at the end to hook up and disconnect. So if I had to be to work at 7:30 in the morning, I had to get up at 6 in the morning and then back up 8 hours. I had to be in bed by 8 o'clock because the cycler's going to take 8 hours. So I had to be in bed at 8 o'clock every night, but I didn't have to necessarily go to sleep. I could read or watch television or something. So there was that discipline that you had to get into a routine, because you always had to remember that your PD was going to take 8 hours approximately. But the joy of it is that you hook up, you go to sleep, the cycler does its work all night long, and then you get up in the morning and hook, and off you go, and living your life as normal. But there is, there was a fair amount of routine again in that you had to be concerned with hygiene. Your living situation has to be a stable one where if you don't have a stable living situation, the PD is going to be a very difficult thing, because you basically have to set up your room, your bedroom, basically as a little, hospital room, kind of like, because your cycler's right there, all of your supplies have got to be there. You got to be thinking about doing everything in a clean fashion. There's a lot of scrubbing of your hands and cleaning the catheter while you're hooking it up originally to the machine, getting the machine ready. You literally go through three at least bags of fluid through the night, and they're all hooked together. So there's a process of getting all that set up in advance, before you go to bed. But it does, after a while, it does just become rote. It's a process. You go through the first couple of times you're scared to death because you do have to consider peritonitis, which you can. That gentleman back there, I think he said he had peritonitis possibly, and if you get a bad enough case of it, it can affect your ability to continue on with PD. So that's always kind of in the back of your mind when you're doing everything in a sterile fashion. But it worked out very well for me. I had a transplant 3 months ago exactly, almost to the day, yesterday, 3 months ago yesterday. And it came about after only, like Linda said, 2 weeks on the transplant list at UC Davis. And I kind of think that the fact that I did very well on PD had something to do with all that because, as you said, it's a gentle type of a modality, and my numbers, you do have to be, your labs are everything, and my labs were always good with the PD, and I think that the transplant team looks at all those kinds of things, and I think that the fact that I had such a great outcome on PD was a major factor in getting my new kidney. I really do. So, question?
In relationship to your transplant, how long did they tell you originally that you had to wait? And then you only got it in 2 weeks.
Well, I tell you, okay, so I'm a Kaiser patient, and they don't have their own kidney transplant.
I'm a Kaiser patient too.
Yeah, so I was put into UCSF system for transplant, and I came to an educational seminar in this very room, and there was somebody in here, and she was going over the centers in the Bay Area and their transplant rates and how many people are on their waiting lists and all that. And I just looked at it and thought, my God, here's UCSF, 8,000 people on their list, and they do 500 a year. Here's UC Davis, they do 500 a year, but they only have 3,000 people on their waiting list. And so I thought, well, this is incredible. I need to get on that UC Davis list. And so I had already been accepted for UCSF, and I went over to UC Davis. I asked my doctor, actually. I went to my doctor and said, can I please get onto the UC Davis list? I'd like a referral. He said, well, I'm sorry, they won't take you. I happen to be HIV positive. He said they don't do HIV positive transplants at UC Davis. And I said, really? I had never heard that. And so that's another thing I want to tell you. Don't believe that doctors know everything. Question. So I called UC Davis and said, I understand that you don't do HIV patients in your transplant clinic. And they said, no, we do. And I said, well, then I would like to be considered to be on your transplant list. And they said, well, you can self-refer, and we'll send you all the paperwork. And I signed up. And of course, I went back to my doctor and said, are you aware of this? And he said, oh, no, I had no idea. I thought UCSF was the only one doing those kind of transplants. So I went through the UC Davis, and literally within 2 weeks of my getting on there, so I'd been on the UCSF for a year and a half, but because of the new rules for transplants, even though you might go to a new center, they retroactively put you back to the day you started dialysis. So I was given credit for all that time, but literally I was on their list for 2 weeks and got the call. So I was very fortunate, very fortunate.
I was first told that I had a mild proteinuria in the mid-70s when I was in my later 20s, and didn't think much of it because I was making way too much money and having way too much fun. But I did make some dietary changes at that time, just based on general recommendations. Well, fast forward from then until 1990, when I was having serious trouble controlling my blood pressure, and went in and had a biopsy done. I was told, oh, you've got IgA nephropathy, and oh, by the way, it'll be 5 years before you're on dialysis, and another 5 to 7 years before you're dead, because that seemed to be the prognosis for dialysis patients at that time. And my wife and I sat down and had a long think and a long talk, and we made a number of changes, dietary and otherwise. And I wound up not needing dialysis until January of 2009, at which I gave my doctor a real good raspberry. And then I got very fortunate. I had the Harkonnen heart plug when I first started with dialysis, and then moved to peritoneal dialysis. And then through an incredible stroke of luck, I got a live donor. Someone came forward from one of the parishes where I was serving at the time and said, well, if we're a match, then my spare kidney is yours. Well, okay. So I had a transplant in September of 2009, which lasted almost exactly 3 years to the day before it failed. And silly me, I went back on peritoneal, which in retrospect was not a bad decision at that time. So that's September of 2012. And in June of 2013, through a somewhat contentious stay at UCSF, I wound up with peritonitis and septicemia. And I spent almost all of July in Kaiser Redwood City, surviving and gradually getting back on my feet, and then took another 7 or 8 months. The mistake I made after that, and the caveat that I would offer as regards to PD, is if you find your doctor moving you from 1.5 to 2.5, and from 2.5 to 4.25 in terms of your percentages on your dialysate, it's really time to get off of PD and onto hemo. I did not do that, and in the course of about 8.5 months, put on nearly 20 kilos, which I am still trying to get rid of. I went on standard in-center 3 times a week for a while, days, and had all of the symptoms that Dori described earlier. And it was taking me a day, sometimes a day and a half to recover. And I knew that this was not right, and so eventually, especially since we weren't getting anywhere with weight reduction, and I moved to nocturnal in December of last year, the first week of December last year. So my labs, and for those of you on dialysis, you get monthly labs whether you want them or not. And my labs this time were the best they have ever been on any form of dialysis. I am particularly comfortable with it, as I said earlier, for both my wife and myself. We have been involved in professions our entire working lives that have us working until midnight, 1 o'clock. Given the kind of consulting I'm doing right now with both the EU zone and Asia Pacific, it's not unusual for me to be running a WebEx or on a conference call at 2 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. So for me to be on dialysis from 6 p.m. until 2:30 is no big deal. And why I don't think of it as being nocturnal in that sense. I think of nocturnal as like 10 o'clock to 6. These are just a number of ways in which the U.S. is about 30 years behind the times in terms of some of these kinds of processes and thinking. And that's a very complex set of questions. I have switched, 8 months ago, I switched from UCSF to UC Davis for transplant. Your mileage will vary. I mean, everybody's experience is different, but after my experience up there and winding up with peritonitis, I'm not terribly fond of them. They are not terribly fond of me. And when you wind up in that kind of setting, it's best to move on. Anyway, so anybody have any questions or not? That's fine too. Yes, ma'am.
Those numbers that you cited at the beginning about the solution or...
Yes, that has to do with peritoneal dialysis. It's the percentage of sucrose in the dialysate, and in increasing strengths. So if your present prescription calls for 1.5, whatever, primarily, then you're probably doing real well. It probably means your peritoneum is working really, really well, and probably you can work on that for whatever period of time, as long as you're very careful with your diet, remember to get exercise, because a normal 2,000 calorie a day diet in food intake, you just drop 500 or 600, 800 calories on top of that in terms of the sucrose that you're carrying in your peritoneum. So that's absolutely useless calories with which you can do nothing except exercise to try to keep it under control. So as you use PD, and this is part of the aging process, plus if you have peritonitis or if you have any other kind of infection of the stomach lining or of the lining of the peritoneum, then you gradually have to move from 1.5 to 2.5, and eventually from 2.5 to 4.25. And I was on the nocturnal machine. I was using 12 liters of 4.25 at night, and 2 additional 4.25 exchanges during the day. And I wasn't getting 8 hours on the machine. I was doing 12 and 14.
Wow.
And my weight kept going up, but my numbers kept going down, and I just finally said, okay, this is ridiculous, because different physicians have different ideas about all of these different forms of modalities of treatment. It's your life. It is your decision, not theirs. The problem is that the information that's out there, and if you're a Kaiser patient, you know that the information is few and far between and hard to get. So you need resources like Dori's book and the website and the MEI's website and all of that, because you've got to educate yourself, because you cannot rely on the information you get. And you must learn how to ask the questions and ask what questions you must to take care of your own life. I mean, it's not like they're going to deliberately obfuscate. It's just that whatever training they've had and whatever their experience is and the limitations of whatever insurance with which they are dealing with therein are going to predict the modalities of treatment that they push and recommend. So if you're on PD, it can probably last for quite a while, and should. But when you start finding those prescriptive numbers on the dialysate going up, it's time to start thinking very seriously about a different modality. Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Bill White. I discovered I had kidney disease after a routine physical exam. I wasn't feeling well. The doctor told me I had high blood pressure, and he also told me at the time that there was a chance that my kidneys were starting to fail. So of course, I was quite young, so one ear out the other, and then I continued on my daily life. Then I started getting ill physically, and went back to my doctor, and he said, "Here, your high blood pressure is causing your kidney damage. Take these medications, and you will feel better, and it'll control your kidney functions." So at the time, I was quite physical, doing a lot of activities. I was young. I just felt that I didn't need it, so I stopped taking the medication as often as I should. And just one of my physical days playing softball, just running, all of a sudden I just like, whoa, I can't even move. I was really sick to my stomach and got slower and slower. Went to the doctor on a Tuesday, and I went home. I went to the doctor, did some blood tests, and then Tuesday night he called me and he said, "You need to come back to the clinic." I went back to the clinic. I was sick, and within 4 hours I was getting a perm catheter in my chest to start dialysis the next day, which was a big shock to me. I mean, it rocked my world. I just didn't know what to do. But having family and support, somebody that can support you or help you with those transitions, is very, very important. Had I not had a wife and children to help me go through the process, because I did not want to do dialysis. Even though I had a perm catheter in my chest, I did not want to do hemodialysis. It was just something I didn't want to do. But I was getting sicker by the day, so I did hemodialysis for 4 years. It was a rough go in the beginning, but I got through it. I didn't want to go to that center 3 days a week. It just became more of a hinder to me, because I couldn't do what I wanted to do, what I was used to doing. But I had to go through it. I was pushed. I had an attitude all the time, because I didn't want to be there. I didn't talk to anybody. Even they divided the television, so I didn't look at it because I just didn't want to be there. And so over a period of time, you get to use, the person sitting next to you, you see them every day, and then you kind of break the ice, and then you go on your way. And then I was invited to NKF had a seminar in San Francisco, and so I went to the San Francisco seminar, and then that's where I met the BAAKP team. And this piece of paper and says, "Here, come to our social group." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, sure." So I went to the social group, and that's how I became a member of the BAAKP. And so I did hemo for 3 years, and then I switched to the manual PD, and I was doing that 3 times a day at 30 minutes a shot, and it would make me better quality of life. I was able to do the things I was doing before. I had more time to travel, more time to do everything. And so as a part member of the BAAKP, I joined the support group. And so then I became chairman of the support group. And all through these support groups that we had at different functions, I was always telling people about you have to be compliant and you have to push yourself. You have to go after yourself. You just can't sit and be on a list and think they're going to call you. You have to make sure they're going to get called. You have to call them constantly. And if your doctor says, "Oh, you go to your doctor, you have 20 minutes." Now you try to stretch that up to 30 minutes. Answer all the questions you can about dialysis. Because a lot of doctors are good doctors, but they don't know the procedures of dialysis. They don't know the procedures fully of the in-center dialysis, let alone the PD. They'll tell you about it, but they won't know the in and outs of it. So you learn it yourself as you're doing it. So one day I was sitting around and talking to my wife, and she said, "Phil, you do all this support group stuff, and you advocate for everybody else. Why don't you advocate for yourself?" And then "Yeah, you're right." So I called DCSF, and I said, "Hey, when am I going to get my kidney?" "Well, we're working on it, you're on the list, yada, yada, yada." This went on, and this went on, and this went on. Then they had a change in leadership at UCSF with my group that I was assigned to. So I don't know, just caught me at a bad time. And I said, "Well, give me the new person's name." They gave me the new person's name and number. And then I said, "Well, when do they start?" "In 3 weeks, you're gonna be the first one she calls, yada, yada, yada." Okay. So Brian said, "So I feel it was nice working." I said, "Brian, do me a favor. Give me your boss's number." "Okay, sure." He gave it to me. I said, "Well, give me his boss's number." "What do you want that for?" "What do you want that for?" I said, "I want it." Within 2 days, they called me. "Mr. White, we're working on you. You're going to be doing this, and we're going to take care of you. And your numbers are great. Just hang in there." So within a month's time, I was ready, and then calling, "No, Mr. White, we're working on it. We're working on it." And then maybe 2 weeks later, on Thanksgiving Day, they called me in the middle of the night, and then I had a transplant. So it just takes some pushing on your part too. Everybody that comes to our support group, they have a tendency to want somebody to do the work for them. We give them brochures, we give them information, we give them phone numbers, references, but they just still think that, you have to, they're just going to call you themselves. But, you have to push yourself. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Well, originally, when you went with UCSF, how long was your wait? And how?
8 years.
8 years.
8
And you
years.
expedited it, and how long did you finally wait and got your transplant?
A month and a half.
Well, I mean, total wait. is how-
Total wait, 8 years.
You waited 8 years anyway?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It was a long 8 years, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and you had to keep yourself well in 8 years, right?
Yes, I did. Question there?
My question was about the PD though. How long should the average person be on PD?
That question I can't answer. Christy, can you answer
Well, because, what I'm hearing is in around 2 years, people are getting infected.
that? The infection comes from just cleanliness. Yeah.
I don't think there is a really good answer. Like Dori said in her presentation, although it's not the recommended choice to stay on long term, she's known people who have been on it long term, and so have I, that didn't have any issues. So I think it's very individualized, but generally it's not a long-term option.
Okay, it's
Just
not
because of-
long term.
Yeah, just because of the impact on the body.
Oh,
You mean PD?
Yeah,
Correct.
Kaiser tells me that I'm on PD, and they said about 3 to 4 years.
is the longest.
Yeah, and I was on PD for 2 years, on 8 hours, and now they just started me on 9 hours. I said, why? I want to go less, not more. I said, you know what, that's how it is with, they don't tell you all up front. You learn as you go along. Then they tell you, oh, well, you know what, don't expect to get less.
Yeah, what they don't tend to ever tell you is that your perineum was never made to filter all of the blood in your body. It's only one cell layer thick, and it will fail. The question is when. It may fail sooner if you get an infection. It may last 18 years if you're tiny and really lucky, but at some point it will fail.
When I initially was told about the PD, they were saying that it used to just be something that was done at the end after a person.
Oh, it used to be a rescue therapy for
Yes.
people who did have no more accesses left for hemo. Yeah, that's true. It makes such a great first option. It's such a great way to keep people in their lives doing the things that matter. Didn't you say it took you 5 weeks to train though?
Well, I was working, and so they arranged my schedule, so they arranged so that I could do 3 times a week, 2 or 3 hours a week, because I was waiting for the catheter to heal anyway, which took about 4 or 5 weeks.
All right, yeah, because these days usually they're training people for PD in about a week, which I think is actually not really quite long enough, but.
Yeah, I'm with Kaiser too, and it takes about 4 weeks. My husband and I were in the session together. See, at my age, I want to be pampered. Now I have all these things I have to carry, and they tell you can't carry more than 30 pounds, and you can't bend, you can't lift, and I said, oh my God, my life is going to be terrible. And then when I had the catheter put in, I told the doctor, you maimed me. He said, maimed? Yeah, I never had a hole in my stomach, now I have a hole in my stomach. And I was allergic to the bandages. There, I tell you, there's a lot of trials and tribulations the first 2 years. It's high maintenance when I what I was doing before with no PD and now with PD. I was infected with the bandages. First month wasn't bad. Then I start itching. And oh my, after 2 years, most of it's gone, and I use ointment and whatever. And at the beginning of the ointment, stinged. But after a while, it didn't sting that much, and it's getting better, but still itches after 2 years. And then my whole body start itching. I'm waking up and I don't sleep very much anymore. Like I sleep maybe an hour or 2 every night, and I have to wake up. And then when I watch TV for a while, then I go back to sleep, and I sleep in the middle of the day. My schedule's all odd now. And fortunately, I'm semi-retired. And I'm itching all over the place. I'm scratching my head, I'm watching TV, I'm doing this. I never did this before. And I'm doing this for a whole hour. And I said to the doctor, who is the head, Dr. Dumpet, over at the San Leandro Kaiser. She's the head of she's the head of nephrology there, the whole kidney department. Everything's under her. And I would ask her about, why am I itching? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's old age. You're older, you're getting itchier. Then she finally said after years that, well, you know what, dialysis does that to people. I said, my mom who was on hemo 20 years ago, she was tired every time, even from the start. And she lasted 4 years and then she died. Okay, but then she pulled they did an emergency catheter from the neck. One night, I don't know, old age or whatever, she pulled it out. Of course, air gets in and she dies in 5 minutes. But it's her that did it. But she was getting weaker and weaker and everything, I noticed that. And she was always itching, even on hemo. That was 20 years ago now. But they said it didn't get any better these days. It got a little better, not too much. But on PD, I'm always itching. My biggest complaint is the itchiness throughout the whole my whole body. My catheter area is still itchy from the bandages.
Greg, did you have that problem with itching?
I did not have the itching problem, no.
Yeah, well, not everybody gets
Phosphorus
allergic to it.
level.
Yeah, I'm allergic to the bandages, and they
Yeah,
try
that's not
silk,
your body.
paper.
What's your
They
phosphorus?
only pay for so much. They don't give you everything in the whole
You know,
world.
I ended up just going out and buying Curad bandages and using those because it was gentler than the heavy-duty tape that they give you. at the PD center, you know, which every time I would, you know, have to change it every day, it would just like rip my skin off. So I did just go out and say, I'll spend the money and get some Curad easy, easy off bandages, you know.
Post-it
maybe I'll
notes
try
for your
it.
skin.
I think we'll move to Wayne next and then save Christy for last, if Christy doesn't mind.
I don't mind at all.
Okay.
Well, I'm Wayne Binion. I had chronic kidney disease for quite a while, though I didn't know about it until I reached stage 4. I was finally discussed it with my internist, and he referred me to a nephrologist. I started home hemo May 4th last year. So I've been on it just over a year. I'm unusual in that I do it by myself, and I have never experienced any other kind of dialysis.
Can you give us a little bit about the procedure for that?
Well, the procedure is you set up the machine and let it prime itself while you get ready, prepare, lay things out. Then when the machine's ready, you cannulate, which is the most challenging thing I faced in the training.
Do you use an anesthetic when you cannulate?
No. And I also don't have a buttonhole either. So I move the site, you know, quarter inch every day until I reach the end and start back at the top.
Is that your choice not to buttonhole?
I started with a buttonhole, and I had a skin problem after about 3 months that I managed to push into my blood. And my nephrologist was not really in favor of buttonholes before, but after that, no. So
And what schedule of treatment do you use?
it's 5 times a week. It runs between 3 and 4 hours a day.
All right, so you're getting up to 20 hours of treatment a week. That's pretty good.
And just recently, I've been learning about the crashing blood pressure and the cramps a lot. And it seems that I've gained weight, but I haven't accepted the fact yet. That seems to be the general opinion down at Wellbound. So, any questions?
You don't have to have help. You're able to do it all by yourself.
I'm able to. It would be a lot easier with somebody else there. Not so much the procedure itself, but running the house while I'm tied down. For quite a few years, I had a loving partner that loved to cook and wanted to take care of me, and did a pretty good job of it. And unfortunately, they got cancer and died, which is why I'm doing it by myself. And I miss having that company, I really do. But, yeah, I am able to do it. I've been doing it. I took the machine home in the middle of June, and I've been just me.
What do you do when your blood pressure drops and you're there by yourself?
Well, I've been told to give myself more saline. And I don't like doing that because that increases the salt and increases the fluids. But I'm still having a kind of a tussle with the Wellbound nurses about that, actually.
How fast is your blood flow rate?
I have had it as high as 1 liter per hour.
Yeah, blood flow, 350, 400, 500.
450 is my top. I very rarely reach that. It's
Good,
usually
okay,
400.
yeah, slower is better, but You might use that, try that calculator that we built, look at your rate of ultrafiltration also. And I know it's weird with, NextStage doesn't work the same as any other machine, and so you're looking at, I don't even remember what they call it, flow fraction and things like that, but look at the rate.
Yeah, well, most of it is how much I want to remove per hour, and
Right.
when I weigh 80, my dry weight was supposedly 80 kilos, and I weighed 85. I would want to take off as much as I possibly could, which just the past few weeks has been too much.
Yeah, you don't necessarily want to take off as much as you possibly can.
Yeah,
'Cause it is riskier when you're by yourself.
yeah. Well, I'm learning that now.
Other questions for folks?
This is for Greg and Horace. Our previous speaker indicated that peritoneal dialysis is probably effective for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe sometimes longer. Did your nephrologist discuss this with you before you went on peritoneal dialysis?
Going in?
No, for me, no, they did not.
For me, no. My second dialysis,
Speakers have,
nephrologist.
microphone.
Yeah. My second nephrologist has been very good about that kind of thing, or my first nephrologist who retired was not, he wasn't quite as good in that way, but he was better in others. I mean, at the end of the day, your mileage may vary, and it's highly individual. I mean, part of the problem that I have with the whole process is that physicians nowadays seem to be locked into the BMI as their sole guide for how much a person. Well, the problem for me is that they want me at a BMI of 82 kilos. Right now I'm at 104. I'm at my best, I'm at my peak in all ways at 90 or 91, and that's not low enough for them. The problem is when I get down to that lower number, I'm cadaverous looking, I have no energy and no spark whatsoever. But all of these things are used in their calculation of how much dialysis of whatever kind it is that you need. And so those of you who've had an 8-hour experience with PD, that's great. That was not my experience. I mean, from the very beginning for me, it was 9 hours. But that has a lot to do with body mass. It has a lot to do with levels of physical activity and everything else. So there's no one size fits all in this. And this is part of the problem with the standard 3 times a week in-center dialysis problem, is that it's only based on the KT over V for urea number. It doesn't really take into account any of those other things, the phosphates, the potassium, any of those middle molecules. And it's similar for peritoneal dialysis. And I would echo what Dori said about the peritoneum is 1 cell thick. It's not designed for what we're asking it to do. And so anything, I mean, conceivably, if you wind up drinking too much coffee, it's going to affect how it works over a period of time. If you wind up like the one gentleman was talking about, eating several meals where the meat has been koshered, well, you're going to have a problem for probably 3 or 4 weeks until all of that stuff comes out, unless you push it, and that has negative effects as well. You wind up trying to take off too much, you wind up trying to do too much. Does that begin to address your question at all?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've heard that peritoneal dialysis has a limited span.
Absolutely, but it's highly individual.
People are often not told that, and they deserve to know that.
Yeah. But you know, Kaiser pushes it all the time.
Everybody pushes it now because it makes more money now.
I was just going to say,
How? Can you tell me how?
it makes more money because you're not in center burning staff time.
Exactly. Well, and they changed the formula
Yeah.
so that PD, they get a higher reimbursement rate for it, and they are pushing it hard, everybody across the country.
Yeah, well, I thought it was because they're cheap. They want me to put the cost on me to maintain myself. versus them doing it. But that's what you're trying to
They
imply.
get paid more money by Medicare now for more people doing PD.
Oh, so they're pushing that,
They're trying to create an incentive for PD.
Well, and here, there's an interesting number around this. It doesn't specifically apply to PD, but it has to do with any home hemodialysis. And I would sort of generally put PD under that, but only very generally. If you go to home hemodialysis, the cost of the machine, the cost of the training, all of that stuff amortizes in 1 calendar year. And from that point on, it's cheaper for your insurance provider for you to be on home hemo. It's because in-center hemodialysis is a huge percentage of the national budget relative to the number of people served. And at the end of the day, that's the problem. It's an economic problem.
But the doctors make more money when people are in
Precisely.
center, so that's a reverse incentive. So there's all sorts of incentives fighting each other so they're all sort of duking it out. Right now, the doctors are winning.
Yes, I think more doctors are still suggesting hemo, right?
Yeah.
See, from a patient standpoint, you know, the thing that I dwelled on too when I was making this decision was, you know, again, I saw what my mother went through, and at some point she became obsessed with water. I mean, she was having to measure everything that she put in her body because she had to be within such tight guidelines to meet that dry weight and everything. And my experience on peritoneal couldn't be more different. I actually never measured my water the whole time I was on peritoneal. I could drink as much water as I wanted to, and it didn't really make that much of a difference. The foods that I ate, yes, I had to deal with the phosphates, with the phosphorus because of and had to have binders. But you know, I could have a potato every now and again, you know, for my potassium if I kept it, you know, if my numbers were good. I could kind of fudge a little bit, but I didn't see that was really all that even possible hardly on hemo. So for me, it was all about the quality of life, you know, and not so much even the cost of my insurance was going to pick it up one way or another, you know. But for me, it was a quality of life, and if I could take PD down the road 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever, that was gonna make, you know, the more the better. But I would take what I could get, you know, before I had to go on to one of the other ones, you know. That was where I was coming from.
Well, shall we go on to Christy now? Let's hear what she has to say.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short and sweet. I was first diagnosed with chronic kidney disease when I was 15. And mine was a result of systemic lupus erythematosus, or lupus.
I don't know whether
SLE.
that's turned on. Is that turned on?
It's turned on.
Okay.
So I had lupus, and by the time I was 18, the kidney disease was getting really serious, so my doctor put me on chemotherapy. So I was on chemotherapy for 3 years, and that did put me into remission. And the reason he basically gave me a decision at 18 is go on to chemotherapy so that I wouldn't have to go on dialysis right away, because that was going to be my future. I had no idea what dialysis was at 18 years old. I was just trying to take in everything that he was telling me. And 10 years, exactly 10 years later, 10 days after my 10-year high school reunion, I went through kidney failure. So I was 28 years old, and I was already working in dialysis about 4 years. So I luckily knew about modality choice because I worked in the field. And it just so happened that the peritoneal dialysis nurse at our facility did an education for the staff in the in-center side talking about peritoneal dialysis, because I had no idea what it was. I only knew the in-center side because that's the side I primarily worked. So as soon as I saw it, I said, oh, well, if I ever need kidney dialysis, I'm going on peritoneal dialysis. And sure enough, I ended up on dialysis. I trained only for 1 week. It did take about a month to heal, but I trained for 1 week, and I was on dialysis for 2.5 years. I tried CCPD, which is the cycler, continuous cycling peritoneal dialysis. My body did not take to it. I was petite, So I could feel the catheter every night as the exchange happened, as it emptied. I felt the catheter pulling.
You had drain pain?
Oh my gosh, it was horrible. So I went back to the CAPD, continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. So it's done just with gravity. At the time, we had no PD patients in my clinic where I worked. So I walked around with my pole and worked and talked to patients about PD. And they had no idea I was on dialysis. They didn't know what PD was. And by the end of it, we had like 20 people switch from hemodialysis to peritoneal dialysis. And I was like, yeah, it's great. I never had an infection. I was very particular about my hygiene. My PD nurse stressed washing my hands for 2 minutes, turning off the air conditioner. I'm from Texas, so I had my dialysis in Texas. I turned off the air conditioner every time I did an hooked up or disconnected so that there wasn't ambient air. I did it in a specific room every time so that it was always clean, no pets, masked up all the time. So I was blessed enough not to have not one infection, and I was on for 2.5 years. For a year, immediately I went on the transplant list. The moment I went on dialysis, I also called the transplant up. I want to go on the transplant list. So I did everything like at once. So everything was happening at the same time. For a year I was on hold, but that was as a result of lupus because they wanted to make sure that I was in remission. My rheumatologist was really good about following with my transplant status, and he made sure that they took me off the hold list. He was like, this is ridiculous. You've been in remission forever. You know, you haven't had any signs, so let's make sure they get you active. And then a 1.5 years later, they called me and I got a transplant. So it was a total of 2.5 years on dialysis, which was the average in Texas for my blood type. So it wasn't fast, it was just the average. And I've had my transplant now for 10 years next month. Any questions?
Christy, can you talk a little bit about the financing?
Sure. So I also work in dialysis. I still work in dialysis, and my primary expertise is insurance. Financing is a difficult part to understand for many patients because you have your Medicare, if you're eligible for Medicare. Primarily because dialysis is a business, dialysis companies want you to be on employer group health coverage or some type of commercial coverage because there is more reimbursement for commercial coverage. If you're on an employer group health plan, it's primary for the first 30 months of Medicare eligibility. Even if you don't enroll in Medicare right away, your employer group health plan remains primary for the first 30 months. That's what dialysis companies want because they get more reimbursement during that 30 months where your commercial insurer is paying. If you switch to Medicare early, you have Medicare, it pays the 80%. If you keep your employer group, it will pay the 20% when they flip-flop. If you drop your employer group for any reason, then you do have a small period of time where you can get, it's a 63-day window when you can switch to a Medicare supplement. That will cover the 20% that Medicare doesn't pay.
Christy, isn't that only if you are, is that true in California? Because in some states that supplements are not available if you are under 65.
It's true and not true. So there are no guaranteed issue rights in many states. However, because if you've had coverage in the past and you've lost it to no fault of your own, there's a guaranteed window where you can get coverage where they're not supposed to ask you any medical questions. So they're not supposed to limit you and prevent you from getting coverage. Does it happen? Absolutely. Because insurance companies are smart and they know that ESRD patients cost a lot of money, so they will challenge an enrollment. But generally, you can still get coverage as long as you lost it and you're getting replacement coverage. Now, if you're just going out to apply for coverage, then they will absolutely not enroll you if you have ESRD in specific states.
That's true, because I called United just over the phone because I saw an ad on TV. Even though I have coverage, I thought, well, maybe I'll switch from one to the other, and maybe United will take me. They said, no, you're under 65, we don't have to take you. They said, sure, when we first got the call, they said, sure, we'll help you. And then when they heard that I had end-stage renal disease, they said no.
Exactly. And for Medicare Advantage plans or Medicare replacements, they don't have to take you at all as an ESRD patient because there are legal exclusionary clauses that preclude ESRD patients from enrolling in a Medicare Advantage. There are some exceptions, but they're far and few between.
Do you want to talk about how home dialysis is impacted? I mean, how your Medicare eligibility is impacted when you go home, or do you do in-center self-care?
Yes, and it's a good point that you bring it up. So another reason that dialysis companies push the home program is because you become Medicare entitled from day one. And patients who are Medicare entitled or enrolled in Medicare from day one, when you're new to dialysis, dialysis companies get an adjustment or an additional reimbursement for patients who are new to dialysis. For the hemo side, the first 3 months you're not eligible for Medicare, so dialysis companies don't get that additional reimbursement. But on the home side, they get that reimbursement because you're Medicare eligible from day one. So it's a lot of incentives for both the dialysis company, and it can benefit the patient too to have Medicare from the beginning, but it depends on your personal situation. Most patients who have employer group health plans, I always advise patients, if you're happy with your coverage, you're happy with your prescription benefits, and you can handle the out-of-pocket costs, you don't have to enroll in Medicare right away. There are many organizations, including transplant centers, that will push for patients to enroll in Medicare right away. But it's not always beneficial to you as a patient because you have to pay those out-of-pocket costs for the premiums. So you want to make sure that you're asking all the questions. Must I enroll right now? Is it possible to delay? What are some of the consequences of delaying enrollment? I know that I experienced a lot of patient calls where patients went to the Social Security office and they chose to delay enrollment because they couldn't afford to pay the Part B Medicare. They had employer group health plans, so they were fine, they were coverage. However, the representative told them, oh, you should enroll in Part A because it's free. But what they don't tell you is when you enroll in Part A and you don't enroll in Part B, it impacts your coordination of benefits period. During that first 30 months, you can enroll in Medicare anytime during that 30-month period that you choose to, if a need arises. Right now, you might not need to, but maybe 15 months down the line, you may need to. If you enroll in Part A, that goes away. The only time you can enroll in Part B after that is during the general enrollment period, which is January 1st through March 31st of any year. And then the Medicare Part B doesn't become effective until July 1st of the year you enroll. So it limits your enrollment options. But they don't explain that. And I think part of it is that at the Social Security level, they understand for the general population, but they don't necessarily understand the special niche financial concerns of the ESRD population.
That is very true, and we have heard that for years. But there's an issue with out-of-pocket costs if somebody doesn't take Medicare because having Medicare in place limits what the companies can charge.
Yes. So I don't necessarily know what it is for for-profit organizations. Satellite is a not-for-profit organization, so we tend to work really well with our patients. We as a not-for-profit, I would say, write off a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that normally the large dialysis organizations do not. But I do encourage patients, when you do have a commercial plan or an employer group health plan that has a large out-of-pocket or your annual out-of-pocket is $5,000. If it's that high, I always say, compare it to what you would pay for Medicare Part B. Medicare Part B right now costs $121.80 per month, $365.40 per quarter, which comes out to about $1,400 per year. That's a savings. $5,000 out-of-pocket over the $1,400 it would cost for Medicare Part B. So chances are you would benefit from enrolling in Medicare Part B because then they can't balance bill you for anything that's Medicare eligible. They bill your primary insurance, they bill your secondary, which would be Medicare, and the only thing you're obligated to is your deductible and anything that is not covered because it's not a Medicare expense. So, but that would be covered. Well, it's not necessarily 20% if your employer group is primary, because some employer groups pay 80-20, some pay 90-10, so it depends on what your out-of-pocket benefit picture is. and it varies depending on the benefits.
We have a
Plan.
question over here.
Yes.
If the ideal dialysis is 5 days a week, why can't you get it 5 days a week? Go in center.
So there are a lot of reasons for that. One is going to be cost to the company. So a company has to provide staff, it has to provide building and supplies. So if the company isn't set up to provide it 5 days a week, then it will, one, automatically limit your chances. Another thing is that I think we get used to what is routine and customary. So because that's what we've always done, we continue to do it. So until there are benefits shown both not only to the patient but also to the provider, the dialysis companies, that won't change quickly because there's a lot of cost involved to providing dialysis that often for every patient. Right now you can stack patients because you can have patients Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can have a whole different set of patients Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. If you're having dialysis every day, that limits the number of patients you can put in those seats.
So, Christy, do you know what the current cost of dialysis these days in the different modalities?
So that varies, and I usually don't speak to cost in general because the reality is it's based on contract. If an insurance company is great at contracting with a dialysis center, then they may pay a lot less than an insurance company that is not contracted. So that can vary between the average $350 or so that Medicare pays to $1,000 a treatment for an employer group health plan. So it does vary.
I can tell you about the home chemo. I just got a bill from Wellbound this past week, so some of the numbers are familiar. They billed Medicare almost $28,000 for 1 month of home hemo 5 times a week. Medicare pays about just under $3,000.
Exactly.
And I'm responsible for 20% of that, except I have an employer health plan that covers up to 10% until my out-of-pocket max for the year, which is $3,000, which I ran into in February or March. So this is the bill for February, which is why I got a bill.
On PD, I got a bill one time, and I was looking, so I went into the claims status of my insurance company to see what was going on. And it looked like PD was they were charging $1,100 a day for PD. And when I got my transplant, it was 2 days after I had received my monthly delivery from Baxter with all the supplies. And so I called and had them come and get them because I didn't need them anymore, right? And the guy shows up at the house and, is loading it all into the truck, and he said, "Do you realize that this is between $30,000 and $40,000 of the supplies you're having me take away?" And I was a little shocked at that was that expensive for the peritoneal dialysis fluids.
Well, based on your calculations, is home dialysis versus PD, based on what you gave me, it costs over $400,000 a year for PD, and then 300 something for your home.
One thing specifically is.
Yeah, not exactly, no.
Well, I mean,
That's
no,
the
but I'm just.
commercial rate that nobody pays.
Exactly.
It's a number that doesn't actually mean anything, don't listen to it.
I'm just curious.
It's a number that changes a great deal based on the insurance and who actually pays what. The other thing to remember, and actually the whole satellite Wellbound thing is a good example of this. Satellite is a nonprofit. The other two arms of the country, of the corporation, are Ascend, the medical lab, absolutely for-profit, and Wellbound, absolutely for-profit. So when you're looking at these different companies, Davida probably has certain similar things going on, so does Rosinius. You have to be very, very careful to look and see what might be a nonprofit and what is clearly not a nonprofit. And the other thing about PD, and I managed to forget to say this earlier, thank you for mentioning it. If you're on PD, you get basically 2 pallets of materials a month. This is roughly 4 feet by 8 feet by about 4 feet high, which has to go someplace.
You have, if you're on PD, you have to have space for all that.
Considerable. It's really considerable.
Well, thank you all. Let's give a round of applause for our